Amid the imposing corridors of the Vatican, there is an object that carries centuries of history and mystery, the Ring of the Fisherman. Its golden shine, forged with ancient and secret materials, surpasses the simple symbolism of Christian faith. It is a silent witness to alliances, the fall of empires, and changes of eras, remaining firm while the world around it crumbled and was reborn. The ceremony of destroying this ring, carried out immediately after the death of a pope, seems at first glance to be merely a ritual to prevent fraud. But is that the only truth? What could be so powerful, so dangerous, contained in a simple ring, that it demands its destruction before the highest authorities of the Church? Welcome to another night, where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Few people stop to think about what really lies behind the Ring of the Fisherman. At first glance, it is merely an ornament worn by the Pope, a direct tribute to Saint Peter, the first leader of the Christian Church. But if we look more closely at the history of this object, we realize it carries a much older origin, wrapped in mysteries that span centuries of silence. Have you ever wondered why the ring is forged with such secrecy? Discrete records indicate that, since the early centuries, the Ring of the Fisherman incorporated fragments of rare materials, some of which have no direct match among the known minerals on Earth. Behind-the-scenes studies, conducted by laboratories linked to the Vatican itself, suggest that certain elements present in the ring simply defy the classifications of modern science. Now, imagine if these materials had an origin that predates the Church itself. When analyzing traditions from ancient civilizations, such as Sumer and ancient Egypt, we find the practice of creating rings to symbolize divine power and access to hidden knowledge. Could it be mere coincidence that the early Christians adopted such a similar symbol for the highest leader of the faith? In manuscripts preserved in ancient monasteries, the first graphical representation of the Ring of the Fisherman does not only display Christian symbols. Complex geometric engravings, similar to those used by Babylonian cultures to represent spiritual portals, are discreetly embedded in the designs. Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps the ring was guarding a much greater connection than mere papal succession? During the Middle Ages, the ring assumed an importance that went beyond faith. It was the key to sealing documents that could never be contested. But what few people know is that many of these documents were not public. They were secret missives that circulated among kings, nobles, and leaders of secret orders. In this context, the Ring of the Fisherman became more than a religious object. It was a silent password of command and influence. Have you also noticed how some traditions simply resist the passage of time? The tradition of sealing secret documents lived on for centuries, even when the ring officially lost its public function. This raises an intriguing question. Why keep the tradition alive in the shadows if its original purpose no longer existed? What kind of agreements could still depend on the symbolic power of this ring? Behind the scenes of history, rumors arose about reserved rings, crafted not for the public eye but for specific and restricted ceremonies. These rings would carry hidden symbols, aligned with knowledge that was never officially disclosed. Have you ever thought that perhaps there are objects of power so well hidden that we don't even know they exist? Over time, each pope received his own Ring of the Fisherman. But ancient versions, preserved in underground chambers of the Vatican, would hold fragments of knowledge and pacts that could never be revealed. What would happen if one day these ancient rings were discovered? What forbidden stories would they have to tell? How many times have you heard that the Vatican hides secrets beneath its millennia-old corridors? It's curious to realize that few objects carry as much mystery as this small ring. If it was merely a symbol of leadership, why the need for so much secrecy, so many rituals, such a ritualistic destruction at the end of each pontificate? Even today, few can explain the true composition of the Ring of the Fisherman. The Vatican maintains absolute silence about its internal analyses. Just imagine if this lack of transparency hides not only the origin of the materials, but the very essence of the power the ring represents. In the end, what does the Ring of the Fisherman really mean? A sacred symbol? An artifact of domination? Or perhaps the final piece of a puzzle that spans eras, kingdoms, and civilizations? When a pope dies, There is a ritual that takes place far from the eyes of the majority, a moment as ancient as the very history of the Church. The ring of the fisherman is removed from the dead pontiff's hand and, under the strict supervision of the camerlengo, it is destroyed in a gesture filled with symbolism. But is the official explanation, to prevent the misuse of the ring, really enough to justify such solemnity? Have you ever stopped to think that if it were just a ring, it would be enough to store it in a safe? Why destroy something that carries such historical and spiritual weight? The silver hammer used in this ritual is not chosen by chance. Silver, since ancient times, has been associated with the purification of hidden forces. The choice of this material suggests not just a physical break, but a symbolic severance from something much greater and invisible. The ritual takes place in silence, before specific witnesses, cardinals, the camerlengo, and church officials. No cameras, no public documents. A hammer strikes the ring, breaking it into pieces, and each fragment is immediately collected, recorded, and stored. Can you imagine how many silent eyes have witnessed this act, knowing that there was more to it than the mere destruction of an object? Interestingly, the destruction is not done randomly. There is an order, almost a choreography, followed precisely for centuries. Some reports describe specific prayers being recited during the process, prayers that are not disclosed to the public. Have you ever wondered if these words might actually be formulas for sealing unknown forces? The destruction of the ring also marks the end of the powers of the deceased pope. During the period known as sede vacant, the Vatican becomes a state without a sovereign, a territory without a spiritual leader. But why must this transition be symbolized by the destruction of the ring, and not just by a formal announcement? What kind of influence is being undone there, beyond visible authority? Imagine if, behind this gesture, there was an attempt to sever a connection that the Pope carried while alive. A connection that, if not broken, could remain active even after his death, bringing unknown consequences to the Church and to the world. The camerlengo, responsible for the ritual, is not a random figure. He is handpicked, trained in secret ceremonies that date back to the founding of the Vatican. His role goes far beyond managing the power vacuum. He is the guardian of the ring's secret, of its destruction, and of what it truly represents. Have you noticed how the role of the camerlengo is rarely discussed outside the Church's inner circles? During the ritual, witnesses swear absolute secrecy. There are rumors that documents detailing the destruction ritual are kept in protected vaults beneath the Vatican, written in ancient codes. If the destruction of the ring were purely symbolic, why the overwhelming need for absolute secrecy? How many times have you seen institutions destroying their leaders' symbols just to prevent counterfeiting? Nowhere else but the Vatican does such a practice exist, so laden with hidden meaning. This raises an inevitable question. What does the ring really contain that demands not only its destruction, but a true exorcism of its existence? Legend says that if the ring is not properly destroyed, uncontrollable forces could be unleashed, forces that the Pope, during his life, was able to contain. Of course, the Church would never officially confirm this. But in the face of centuries of tradition and silence, it's hard not to wonder, what is really broken at that moment, the gold or what inhabits it? The ritual of the hammer upon the ring of the fisherman remains one of the most mysterious events in the history of the Church. And perhaps what is truly destroyed there is not just the symbol of a reign, but the very link between the visible and the invisible. For centuries, the ring of the fisherman was not merely a symbol of spiritual leadership. It was in fact a seal of absolute power. With it, the Pope authenticated documents that not only guided faith, but shaped the destiny of entire nations. A single seal bearing the image of the fisherman pulling in the nets was enough to end disputes, declare crusades, and seal secret treaties between kingdoms. Few people reflect on the weight of a seal in times when the word of a pope could alter the course of history. It was not just about religious matters. Economic decisions, political alliances, and territorial expansions were also authorized by this small object. A papal seal could be more feared than an army, more definitive than a sword. Have you noticed how, throughout history, small symbols have carried enormous power? The ring of the fisherman was a perfect example of this. By sealing a document, the Pope was not merely authenticating information, he was imprinting a command, a decree that transcended borders and kings. Who would dare disobey a word sealed by the leader of Christendom? During the Middle Ages, bearers of documents sealed with the papal ring traveled protected by an almost mystical aura. They were received with honor, and their messages were rarely questioned. The very act of carrying the seal made the messenger inviolable. Have you ever thought about the silent power an object could carry in such turbulent times? Over time, records emerged of sealed documents that never became public. Secret treaties, letters addressed to hidden orders, instructions for the manipulation of governments and economies. According to respected theorists, these documents are still today kept in secret Vatican archives, sealed with rings that not all eyes were allowed to see. The ritual of sealing documents had its secrets as well. It was not enough simply to press the ring into the hot wax. There were gestures, murmured prayers, invocations that, according to some internal traditions, sealed not only the message but also an invisible spiritual commitment between sender and recipient. Could the ring, in this process, have acted as a kind of intermediary between worlds? You know that moment when a simple gesture changes the course of something much greater? That's exactly what happened when the ring of the fisherman was pressed into the wax. The gesture carried such powerful symbolic weight that, even without words, it communicated obedience, reverence, and often total submission to the will of Rome. In the following centuries, with the emergence of new forms of communication and authentication, the use of the ring to seal public documents was gradually abandoned. Officially, it was merely an adaptation to the new times. But curiously, even with all the available technologies, certain seals continued to be used in internal and secret documents. What still requires the signature of such an ancient ring? Some theories suggest that the ring, when sealing a document, established an energetic link between the papal authority and the content of the message. This practice traces back to esoteric traditions where physical symbols carry spiritual energy. It's strange to think that, in the 21st century, such practices might still exist in places of such power. Have you ever wondered if the ring could be more than just a tool of temporal power? What if it also functioned as an instrument of transferring influence, directly connecting the Pope's power to decisions that still shape the world today? The end of the ring's official use as a public seal does not necessarily mean that its symbolic power has disappeared. On the contrary, the less it is spoken of, the more deeply rooted its mystery becomes in the backstage of history. What is invisible often governs what is seen. Thus, the ring of the fisherman remains more than a relic. It is, silently, a testament to how symbols and rituals can control entire worlds, without needing a single word. In virtually all ancient cultures, the ring was always much more than a mere piece of adornment. It was, in fact, a visible symbol of dominion, of access to spheres of power not always understood by the common people. Since the earliest times, a ring on the right finger could mean the difference between being a servant or a sovereign. Have you ever noticed how the act of receiving or wearing a ring is almost always accompanied by a ceremony, an oath, or a pact? This happens because, culturally, the ring represents something that goes beyond the physical object. It is a sealed alliance, a transfer of authority and commitment that often transcends the material plane. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs wore signet rings to legitimize their will as divine will. Among the Romans, rings were used to authenticate orders and recognize hierarchies amid the chaos of wars and political intrigues. In Celtic tradition, rings were used in rituals of spiritual union and the consecration of warrior leaders. Always the same pattern, the ring as a tool of legitimization and connection to something greater. Imagine if these rings were more than mere symbols. What if they actually carried a kind of energy, influence, or accumulated memory passed down through generations? Each time a new bearer took on the ring, would they not be inheriting not just an object, but the full weight of the power that came with it? In the religious realm, this tradition remained astonishingly faithful. Bishops received rings when they assumed their positions. Templar knights wore rings that represented vows of loyalty and sacred protection. And of course, the Pope, with the ring of the fisherman, seals the direct union with the spiritual heritage of St. Peter and, according to some theories, with something even deeper. How many times have you seen movies or stories where a ring is the central object of power? It's not just fiction. The symbolism of the ring as a source or channel of power is as old as human history itself. Pop culture merely reflected what our ancestors already knew. A closed circle of precious material on the finger is more than appearance. It is commitment, it is dominion, it is ritualistic magic in action. Observing the history of reigns, it is curious to note how kings received their rings in public ceremonies involving almost religious rituals. The coronation of a monarch without the delivery of a ring would be considered incomplete. After all, how could one govern without carrying the symbol of divine right? Have you ever wondered why even today marriages involve the exchange of rings? It is a pact, a ring sealing a promise before witnesses, very much like the oaths that sealed entire kingdoms in antiquity. A tradition that persists, often without us realizing its true symbolic weight. In Freemasonry, secret societies, mafias, and even clandestine government organizations, the ring continues to appear as an element of recognition and hierarchy. It is no coincidence. It is a silent echo of a tradition much older than we imagine, transmitted through the ages, camouflaged in social ceremonies. Do you also feel that certain symbols never disappear, only change form? The ring is one of them. It has survived the fall of empires, the decline of religions, and the changing of eras, always carrying with it the idea that power can be transmitted, sealed, and even eternalized through such a simple gesture. In the case of the ring of the fisherman, it is not merely a religious custom. It is the materialization of a lineage of power that extends far beyond the church. It is the continuation of a tradition that recognizes in the ring not just an adornment, but a true key to the invisible dominion over souls, territories, and consciences. Behind each ring, there is a story, a pact, and often a secret that was never meant to come to light. And in the Vatican, few objects hold as many secrets as the ring of the fisherman. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen. Governments collapsed, economic systems crumbled, ideologies were replaced by new ones. But the Vatican remained, invisible in its strategies, silent in its movements, yet always firm, like a fortress amid chaos. How can such resilience across the centuries be explained? Have you ever stopped to think that while the great powers engaged in bloody wars, the Vatican grew even stronger in the shadows? Never directly leading armies, but influencing the backstage where real decisions were made. No other institution has survived so long without losing its relevance. None. During the Middle Ages, while kingdoms fought among themselves, the Vatican consolidated agreements, gathered wealth, and expanded its reach through souls and culture. It was the center of a power that needed no military territory, but dominated through faith and hidden diplomacy. How could you overthrow a force that did not need to expose itself on the battlefield? In times of reform, revolution, and schisms, the Catholic Church lost territories but not its core of power. It adapted, retreated in some areas, but always reemerged stronger in others. Few institutions have understood the concept of survival as well as the Vatican, which saw in symbolic and spiritual control its greatest weapon. Imagine if, while the world outside was swept by change, the Vatican was merely recalibrating its internal networks of influence. A state that, technically, is the smallest in the world but possesses one of the most vast, silent, and effective diplomatic networks in human history. The secret to its resilience seems to lie precisely in maintaining the symbols of invisible power. The ring of the fisherman, the papal seals, the millennial ceremonies, all reinforcing the idea of continuity, authority, and a direct connection to a higher power. Have you noticed how even the most skeptical still respect these symbols, even if they don't admit it? Over the centuries, secret documents exchanged between popes and monarchs determine the fate of nations. Silent treaties, improbable alliances, and political survival strategies that kept the Vatican untouched while the world around it crumbled. No empire has resisted time like the Church of Rome. Have you ever thought about how it is possible for a religious institution to maintain influence over banks, universities, knightly orders, and even political dynasties? The Vatican understood, long before anyone else, that power did not need to be seen. It only needed to be felt, revered, and feared. Even in modern times, with public scandals and image crises, the Vatican's inner core remains solid. Nothing is revealed that cannot be controlled. No secret leaks without first a calculated decision about the consequences. What is revealed is often only what is no longer useful to keep hidden. Have you also noticed how certain structures simply do not break? They just change form? The Vatican is one of these structures. Invisible to many, but fundamental to the functioning of global systems that few dare to question. Perhaps the key to this power lies in the very rituals that the Vatican has never abandoned. Each pope, each succession, each symbolic gesture, all reinforce the invisible network of influence that transcends borders, religions, and governments. A power that does not rely on weapons but on symbols, pacts, and silent promises. Thus, while the modern world chases new forms of power, the Vatican continues holding the old keys. Keys that, for many, continue to open doors that should never have been opened. Amid so many layers of secrets, symbols, and traditions, an inevitable question arises. How far does the line between faith and control go? The ring of the fisherman is just a visible piece of a much older and quieter mechanism. A mechanism that, over the centuries, shaped the reality of entire peoples without them even realizing it. Have you ever wondered how many traditions we follow today without knowing where they really came from? Often, we repeat gestures, revere symbols, and accept rituals without questioning their true origins or purposes. And when it comes to the Vatican, this silent acceptance seems to be an essential piece in maintaining its discrete power. For centuries, the Church managed not only the faith of the people but also their knowledge, their culture, and even their science. Educational institutions, art academies, and even astronomical observatories were funded and, in some way, controlled by invisible hands. And what if I told you that many of the most important discoveries in history first passed through the eyes of the Church before reaching the public? While protecting its doctrine, the Vatican also protected, and still protects, knowledge that could completely change the world's view. Relics, ancient documents, forgotten manuscripts, theories considered dangerous, all carefully guarded under layers of bureaucracy, silence, and rituals. The destruction of the ring of the fisherman at the end of each papacy is only the most visible rite of a much broader tradition of control and preservation of secrets. It's not just the ring that is ended, but an entire cycle of pacts, commitments, and silent agreements that ensure the survival of an invisible structure. Have you ever thought about what would happen if all these secrets came to light? How many pillars of modern society would be shaken? How many beliefs, certainties, and structures would collapse before a truth long hidden in stone corridors and silent halls? The search for truth demands more than faith or curiosity. It demands courage to question, to deconstruct comfortable narratives, and to face the possibility that not everything is as it seems. Are we ready for that? The ring of the fisherman is a silent reminder that power does not always present itself explicitly. Often, it manifests in small gestures, in ancient symbols, in traditions that survive precisely because their true meaning remains hidden. How many times have you felt that something in the great narratives of the world simply didn't fit? Perhaps because there are pieces that were never shown. Pieces hidden not by accident, but because their revelation would change the very board. In each papal transition, in each secret ritual, a small fraction of this hidden story is renewed, reaffirming pacts that we, as spectators, only sense but rarely fully comprehend. What we know is only the surface. Beneath the rituals, beneath the rings, beneath the centuries of history, there is an invisible current that moves structures far beyond faith. And this current, though invisible, remains alive, silent, constant, and powerful. The search for truth is a long and lonely road, but a necessary one. Because as long as we accept only what is shown, we will remain prisoners of the pieces someone decided we were allowed to see. The ring of the fisherman is more than an artifact. It is the visible tip of a silent web that spans eras, civilizations, and dynasties. While empires crumbled and entire systems were reinvented, the ring and what it represents remained untouched, reinforcing invisible pacts and keeping alive an order sustained not by the force of arms, but by the influence of symbols. Those who control the symbols control the souls. And few have understood this, as well as those who walk beneath the silent vaults of the Vatican. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you will see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.